She walked into his studio thinking it was just a job, signed a contract she never read, and sat across from the most controlled man she had ever met. He had rules for everything, walls built high and maintained daily, and absolutely no intention of letting anyone past them. But something about her refused to stay on the other side. It started with stolen glances across a corridor, a name said too quietly in a storage room, 2 coffees left without explanation. It built through late nights, warm amber rooms, and the slow, unbearable tension of 2 people trying not to want what they already knew they wanted. By Christmas Eve, the walls were gone, and what came after was the part nobody put in the contract. Before we dive in, please hit subscribe and follow our Patreon link on the description. There is a kind of man who builds his walls so carefully, so precisely, that even he forgets there is something worth protecting on the other side. Marcus Ellison was that kind of man. 30 years old. 6 feet of controlled stillness. The kind of presence that made a room go quiet the moment he stepped through the door, not because he was loud, but because he was the opposite of loud. He moved through the world like a man who had already decided every outcome before anyone else had finished asking the question. People at the Alara Wellness Studio on the corner of Northfield Avenue learned very quickly that Marcus did not do small talk. He did not do favors. He did not do exceptions. He ran his massage therapy business with the kind of discipline that made other small business owners quietly ashamed of their own looseness. Every appointment started on time. Every client file was updated within the hour. Every contract, every policy, every staff expectation was documented, printed, and signed. And that was the problem, really. The contracts. Because on a Tuesday morning in late October, a woman named Sarah Calloway sat across from him in the small glass-walled office at the back of Alara. Her blonde hair pulled back imperfectly, one strand falling across her cheekbone in a way she did not seem to notice. And she signed the employment contract without reading it. All 12 pages of it. She initialed the margins, turned each page with the casual confidence of someone who had signed many contracts and trusted the general goodness of the universe. And then she placed the pen down on the oak desk and smiled at him like she had just done something ordinary. Marcus looked at the contract. He looked at her. He looked at the contract again. "You didn't read it," he said. "I skimmed it," she said. "That is not the same thing." "I got the main idea." "The main idea," Marcus repeated, and there was something in the way he said those 3 words, something flat and precise that made Sarah sit up slightly straighter in the green velvet chair. "The main idea is not sufficient. There are 19 clauses in that contract. Several of them directly affect your schedule, your client assignments, and your conduct on the premises." "I'm sure it's fine," Sarah said. Marcus opened the contract to page 7, turned it around and slid it across the desk toward her. He tapped one specific clause with his index finger. She leaned forward to read it, and the strand of hair fell further across her face. "The overnight inventory rotation," she read aloud. "All junior therapists are required to participate in the quarterly supply rotation, which may include evening hours not exceeding 11 p.m. She looked up. "That seems reasonable. Keep reading." She read further, read. Her expression shifted. "Wait. The rotation includes cleaning and reorganizing the massage room storage, the linen cabinet, the oil and product inventory, and the—" She paused. "The therapist sleep quarters? The studio has a restroom for therapists working split shifts," Marcus said. "It includes a bed. During inventory rotation, that room is reorganized as well. The contract specifies that junior therapists are responsible for that rotation." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Then a slow smile started somewhere in her eyes and worked its way gradually, reluctantly, to the corner of her mouth. "So when you said the contract included something about your bed?" "The studio bed," Marcus corrected. and the speed of that correction was, in retrospect, slightly too fast. The restroom, which is a studio resource, not my personal... He stopped. He cleared his throat. The point is that you signed something you did not read. That is a pattern I need you to understand will not serve you well in this environment. Sarah picked up the contract and flipped back to the beginning. Can I read it now? You already signed it. So I'm learning in real time, she said pleasantly, and turned to page 1. Marcus watched her for 3 full seconds. Then he stood, straightened his white clinical jacket, and walked to the window that overlooked the main studio floor, where 2 of his other therapists were preparing their rooms for the morning appointments. He told himself he was not irritated. He was concerned about professional standards, about liability, about the operational integrity of a business he had spent 4 years building from a single rented room in a shared wellness space into a 6-treatment studio with a waiting list that ran 3 weeks out. He was not thinking about the way she read, with her lips pressed together in concentration and her finger tracing the lines like she was trying to memorize something. He was not thinking about that at all. Sarah Calloway had come to Alara the way most good things come to you in your early 20s. Sideways, unplanned, and in the middle of something else going wrong. She had been working at a larger spa chain on the east side of the city, one of those places with bamboo diffusers in every room and a playlist that recycled the same 7 ambient tracks in an endless loop. She was good at her job. Her clients rebooked. Her tips were consistent. But the management there had recently changed, and the new manager had a philosophy about efficiency that involved booking appointments back-to-back with no transition time, no rest, and a bonus structure that quietly punished therapists who did not upsell. Sarah had raised her concern at a staff meeting, professionally politely, and 3 days later she had been quietly scheduled for the least desirable shift slots, until the message was clear enough that she started looking elsewhere. She found Alara through a former colleague who had done a continuing education workshop there. The studio had a reputation, she was told. The owner was strict. Not a bad strict, her colleague said, more like exact. Everything was documented, everything was clear. If you followed the rules, you were treated well. If you didn't, you were gone. Is he a good person? Sarah had asked. Her colleague had thought about that for longer than was entirely reassuring. He's fair, she said finally, which is better than good most of the time. So Sarah had applied. She had come to the interview in her best professional clothes, had answered every question directly, had brought her continuing education certificates in a labeled folder. Marcus had asked her 3 questions that surprised her. Not about her technique or her experience, but about how she handled a client who pushed a boundary, how she communicated discomfort without losing the session, and what she believed the purpose of therapeutic touch actually was. She had answered honestly. She thought the purpose was the same as any other form of genuine attention, making someone feel that they existed, that their body was worth caring for, that someone's hands were saying in 60 minutes what the world outside rarely bothered to say at all. Marcus had written something in his notebook when she said that. She had not been able to see what. He had offered her the position 3 days later, via a formally written email with the contract attached. She had, in fairness to herself, intended to read it. She had simply been distracted by the part where the attached studio brochure described the massage room as having heated floors, a rainfall sound system, and what it called a warm amber lighting environment designed to encourage the body's natural descent into rest. And she had lost 20 minutes imagining what it would be like to work in a room that sounded like that. The contract had seemed by then like a formality. She understood, sitting across from Marcus on that first morning, that this was not how Marcus experienced formalities. The studio was beautiful, though. She had not imagined that wrong. The main corridor was painted a deep eucalyptus green, and the treatment rooms opened off it like small chambers of quiet. Each room had the heated floors she had read about, and walls the color of raw linen, and a single framed print of something botanical, large-scale and unhurried. The product shelves were organized with a precision that made her want to stand very still in front of them and simply look. Every oil was labeled, every label faced forward. The towels in the warming cabinet were folded in thirds. The restroom, which Marcus had shown her during the brief orientation walk before her first client arrived, was at the end of the corridor behind a door painted the same linen color as the treatment rooms. It was small but not uncomfortable. A narrow bed with a dark gray fitted cover, a single lamp on the side table, a hook on the wall for a jacket or a coat, clean, spare. The kind of room that someone had thought carefully about, even if they had chosen not to make it comfortable in any way that was not strictly necessary. "The pillow is from the linen cabinet," Marcus had said, which she had not asked about, and which told her something. She had worked her first day without incident. Her clients were the usual mix, people carrying the weak in their shoulders and hips. People who made small conversation at the beginning and went quiet in the middle and thanked her at the end, with the particular soft gratitude of someone who has just been given something they did not know they needed. She was good at this. She always had been. At the end of the day, Marcus had reviewed the client files she had submitted, confirmed that the documentation was complete, and told her in the same level tone he used for everything that she had done adequate work. Sarah had looked at him for a moment. "Just adequate?" she said. "Adequate means sufficient to the standard," Marcus said. "It is not a criticism. It doesn't feel like a compliment either." He looked at her the way she was starting to understand was his version of a long look, which from anyone else would have been 10 seconds and from Marcus was approximately 1.5. "You'll receive a full performance review at the 60-day mark," he said. "Standards are established before praise is calibrated." "That's a very specific philosophy," Sarah said. "It's the only one that works," he said and went back to his office. She stood in the corridor for a moment looking at the closed door with the small frosted glass panel at the top that let through just enough light to see his outline, bent over the desk, already writing something. She noticed that the back of his neck was tense. She noticed that he had not taken his jacket off all day, not even in the late afternoon when the studio warmed and everyone else had rolled their sleeves. She noticed that he kept his phone face down on the desk and never checked it when other people were in the room. She was a therapist. Noticing the body was her job. She told herself that was all it was and drove home in the early dark of a late October evening thinking about adequate and what it meant from someone who seemed to have no gradient between sufficient and insufficient and nothing at all between. November came in cold and stayed that way. The studio was busy. The waiting list for December was already running 4 weeks and Marcus had started taking on a limited number of new clients himself, something he apparently did not usually do because Priya, the senior therapist who had worked at Elara for 2 years, mentioned it to Sarah with the particular tone of someone reporting a mild atmospheric anomaly. "He usually just manages," Priya said, refilling the oil warmer in room 3. "He trained as a therapist, obviously. You can't run a place like this without it, but he phased out his client load about a year ago. Said the administrative side needed his full attention." "What changed?" Sarah asked. Priya glanced at her and then looked away. "Staffing," she said, which was not an answer, and both of them knew it. Sarah had by then learned several things about Marcus that she had filed away in the part of her mind she used professionally. He was consistent in a way that was almost physical, like weather. He arrived before anyone else and left after everyone else. He restocked the warming cabinet himself on Thursday mornings because he had found that if left to the general rotation, it was done inconsistently. and he had apparently decided that doing it himself was more efficient than correcting it repeatedly. He ate lunch at the small table in the kitchen at 12:45 every day. Something from a container he brought himself, and he ate it reading, and he did not invite conversation. He was not unkind. That was the thing Sarah kept coming back to. He was not warm, but he was not unkind. When a client came in distressed one afternoon, crying quietly before her appointment even started, Marcus had been the one to step out of his office and speak to her in the corridor in a voice too low for Sarah to hear, and the client had gone into the treatment room steadier. He had rescheduled her without charge and updated her file with a note Sarah could not read but saw him write with the same careful, deliberate hand he used for everything. He held the door for people without appearing to notice he was doing it. He remembered how everyone took their coffee, though he never commented on it, when the building's heating system had a fault in the second week of November, and the studio dropped to an uncomfortable temperature. He had driven to the supply store himself and come back with 2 plug-in heaters before the first client arrived, and he had set them up in the treatment rooms without asking anyone to help and without mentioning it afterward. He was, Sarah was beginning to understand, a man who expressed care entirely through action and never through language, and who seemed either unaware that this made him difficult to read or had decided that was acceptable. She thought about this one afternoon while she was restocking the product shelf at the end of her shift, arranging the amber oil bottles in order of size the way Marcus had shown her in the orientation, and she thought about what it would be like to be the person who finally made him say something. Not just do something, actually say it. She put the last bottle on the shelf and stepped back and noticed, with a small internal pause, that she had just spent 4 minutes thinking about her employer, and that this was not the direction she needed to be going. She straightened the label on the largest bottle, turned it precisely forward, and went to clock out. The first time the distance between them changed, it was an accident. Most things are. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and the studio was running a full schedule, and Sarah was between appointments when she went to the storage room at the back to get a fresh set of linens. The storage room was narrow, and the linen shelves ran floor to ceiling on one side. She had taken down a set from the second shelf and was turning to leave when the door, which had a weighted hinge that everyone at the studio was in the habit of propping open with the small rubber wedge kept specifically for that purpose, swung shut. She had not propped it. She turned the handle. The handle turned, but the door did not open. She tried again. The latch was old and occasionally needed to be lifted slightly while turning, a quirk she had been told about but had not experienced personally until now. She adjusted her angle, lifted, turned. Nothing. She knocked. She called out. The corridor outside was quiet, everyone in session. She stood in the narrow storage room, which smelled of clean linen and eucalyptus and a faint trace of whatever oil had been decanted in here recently, and she considered her options. She could wait. She could continue knocking. She could text, except that her phone was at the reception desk because she had set it down to carry the water carafe to the waiting area and not picked it up again. She knocked again, louder this time, and then the handle turned from the outside with the particular lift and turn motion that worked, and the door opened, and Marcus was standing in the frame with a set of towels under one arm and an expression that was not quite neutral. "The door stuck," Sarah said. "I know. The latch needs to be lifted." He looked at her for a moment. "You were told." "I was told. I forgot." He nodded, which was not acceptance and was not forgiveness and was simply acknowledgement. He stepped back to let her out of the storage room, and she moved past him in the narrow space of the doorway, close enough that she caught the scent of him, something clean and warm and faintly cedar adjacent. And she was aware in the precise and inconvenient way of someone who was trying not to be aware that he did not step back as far as the space would have permitted. It lasted exactly 2 seconds. She moved into the corridor, He moved into the storage room. The weighted door swung shut behind him with a soft, mechanical click. Sarah stood in the corridor with the set of clean linens and thought very firmly about the appointment she had in 4 minutes and the specific pressure sequence she was going to use on her next client's upper trapezius and nothing else. She went to room 2 and began setting up. Behind her, through the wall, she could hear the faint movement of Marcus returning the towels to the shelf with the same quiet, deliberate precision with which he did everything. And she told herself that she was not listening for it. And that was probably the first moment she knew she was lying to herself. The Thanksgiving week was quiet in the particular way of a city that has collectively decided to pause. The studio closed Wednesday afternoon and reopened Saturday, and Sarah used the break the way she usually used unexpected time. Imperfectly and with good intentions that did not quite materialize. She had planned to go home to her parents for the holiday. She had, in fact, booked the train ticket in October with the satisfied feeling of someone who has their life organized. And then her mother had called in early November to say that her father's brother was visiting with his entire family. And the house was going to be a particular kind of fool that Sarah, who found her family's particular brand of cheerful chaos deeply draining in a way she had never found a kind way to express, had quietly decided she did not have the reserves for. She had told her mother she had picked up an extra shift. This was not entirely untrue. She was on call for 2 of Marcus's clients who had been waitlisted for a Saturday slot if a cancellation opened. She spent Thanksgiving Day alone in her apartment, which was on the 4th floor of a building on the west side with a window that looked out over a small park where the trees had gone entirely bare. She cooked something that started as a recipe and became something else through a series of improvised decisions, and she ate it at her kitchen table reading, and it was fine. It was genuinely fine. She was someone who had always been comfortable with her own company, which was one of the things that made her good at her job. You had to know how to be quiet without being empty. But sometime in the late afternoon, with the park trees moving in the November wind and the city quieter than usual outside, she found herself thinking again about Marcus. Specifically about whether he had gone somewhere for the holiday. Whether there was someone waiting for him in a warm place. Whether he sat at a table with people who knew how to read the language he spoke, which was not words. She picked up her phone and put it back down. She was not going to text her employer on Thanksgiving Day. She was not that person. She was not. She picked it up again and typed, "Hope you're having a good holiday." Then she held it for a long moment, looking at the words. And then she very carefully deleted it and put the phone face down on the table and went back to her book. 20 minutes later, her phone lit up. It was Marcus. The studio heat is set to auto-reduce over the break. If you are in the area Saturday, please check that rooms 1 and 3 have returned to temperature before the first appointment. The wall thermostat for room 3 sometimes needs a manual reset. She read it twice. Then she typed back, "Will do." "Happy Thanksgiving, Marcus." There was a pause of approximately 11 minutes. Then, "You as well." She looked at those 3 words for longer than 3 words warranted. Then she put the phone down and went back to her book, and this time she actually read it. Saturday she arrived early. She checked rooms 1 and 3, found that room 3 did indeed need a manual thermostat reset, performed it, and was at the reception desk going through the day's schedule when Marcus arrived at 7:45 with 2 coffees from the place on the corner. The one she had mentioned to Priya once in passing was the only place in the neighborhood that got the oat-milk ratio right. He set one on the reception desk without looking at her. She looked at it. She looked at him. He was already moving toward his office. "Marcus," she said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, the same nod that was not acceptance and was not forgiveness, and went into his office, and she heard his chair move and his computer come on, and she wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, and the warm amber morning light came through the studio windows and fell across the eucalyptus green walls. And she sat with it for a moment, quiet before the first client of the day arrived. December moved through the city like something with an agenda. The streets outside the studio were loud with the particular noise of a city performing its seasonal rituals, lights in the trees, music through open shop doors. The hurry of people who were late for something they had already been late for last year. Inside Alara, the tempo was different, full, but contained. The studio had developed its own atmosphere over the years, something Marcus had shaped without appearing to. The way certain people shape a room simply by being consistently themselves inside it. Sarah was by now good at her job here specifically. She understood the clients, their patterns, their particular forms of holding. She understood the product system and the documentation system and the quiet communication rhythms of the other therapists. She understood that the small wooden bowl on the reception desk always had spearmint candies in it, because Marcus had noticed that clients often came in with the residual tension of having rushed their lunch, and something to eat on arrival helped. He had never explained this. She had simply asked one day and he had told her briefly, and that was that. She was learning him the way you learn a landscape, not all at once, in pieces over time as the light changed. He was not learning her. She was fairly sure of that and had made her peace with it, or was in the process of making her peace with it, which is a different thing but close enough to count. And then, one evening in the second week of December, the quarterly inventory rotation came. Sarah had by this point read the contract in full. She was aware of the clause. She had shown up at 7 in the evening in comfortable clothes with her hair in a loose knot, and had found Marcus already in the storage room with a clipboard, methodically working through the oil inventory. He had not commented on her appearance, which was good because she had not dressed to be looked at. He had simply handed her a second clipboard with the linen inventory list attached and said, "Start with the warming cabinet. Work backward to the standard shelves." She started with the warming cabinet. They worked in parallel for the first 40 minutes, moving through the supply rooms with the quiet efficiency of people who both understood the value of the task and were not interested in performing the labor of small talk over it. There was music playing from the small speaker Marcus had placed in the corridor, something instrumental and unhurried. The studio at night was a different place than the studio in the day. Softer. The amber lighting that had been described in the brochure was at its most accurate now. Everything warmer and slower. The sharp clinical edges of the workday gone. Sarah was on her knees reorganizing the lower shelf of the product storage when she reached for a box at the back and misjudged the balance. And the entire row of amber oil bottles on the shelf above shifted and 2 of them fell. One onto the shelf below and one, in an arc she had no time to intercept, directly onto the sleeve of the jacket she had hung on the hook by the door. She stood up fast. The bottle had not broken, which was the first thing. The second thing was that a generous pour of warm cedar and bergamot oil was soaking into the left sleeve of the jacket. She turned to see Marcus standing in the doorway. He looked at the jacket. He looked at the oil spreading through the fabric. He looked at her. "I'm so sorry," she said. "It was an accident. I'll take it to the cleaners. I'll replace it if it doesn't come out." "Stop," Marcus said. Not unkindly, just precisely the way he said everything. He came into the storage room, took the jacket from the hook, and examined the sleeve. He turned it. The oil had gone deep into the fabric. He was standing very close to her in the narrow room. The cedar and bergamot from the spilled oil was in the air between them, warm and specific. "The cleaner on Morrison can get oil out of anything," he said. "I've taken linens there." "I'll take it," Sarah said. "First thing tomorrow." He looked at her for a moment. Not the standard 1.5 seconds. Longer. And in that longer look there was something she had not seen from him before. Something that was not evaluation, and was not management, and was not any of the things she had learned to read from him over 2 months. It was quieter than any of those. It was the kind of look that a controlled person allows through only when they have momentarily stopped controlling it. "Sarah," he said, just her name, nothing after it. As if the sentence had started and then he had decided something and the rest of it had stayed where it was. "Marcus," she said, and she was not entirely sure what she meant by that either. The instrumental track in the corridor shifted to something slower. The amber light held. The cedar and bergamot hung in the air between them like something that had been said without words. He folded the jacket over his arm with the same careful precision he used for everything, and he stepped back, and the moment, which had not quite been a moment, but had been the architecture of one, settled into the ordinary quiet of the storage room at night. "Finish the linen inventory," he said. "I'll handle the rest of the oil shelf." "Okay," she said. He went back to the corridor. She stood for one more second in the storage room, her pulse several degrees louder than it had been 2 minutes ago. And then she picked up her clipboard and went to finish the linen inventory. The rest of the rotation passed in a quiet that was different from the earlier quiet. Not uncomfortable, but aware. The way a room is aware after lightning when the thunder has not come yet and the air is still holding it. At the end of the night, Marcus walked her to the studio door and held it open in the way he always did, as if he had not decided to do it. And she went out into the December night with the scent of cedar and bergamot still faint on the air around her. And she did not look back at him because she knew if she did, she would see him watching her go. And that was too much information for one evening. She walked to her car in the cold December dark and drove home, and the city moved around her bright and loud and full of its seasonal urgency. And she thought about a man who said her name like it was a sentence he had chosen not to finish, and what it might mean to want to hear the rest of it. She replayed it 3 times before she fell asleep. Not the moment itself, but the architecture of it. The way he had said her name and then chosen not to finish the thought, and what that choosing had looked like on a man who finished everything, who documented everything, who left nothing to the approximation of a feeling when a precise word was available. The fact that he had used no precise word at all was, in its own way, the most precise thing he could have done. She understood, in a particular kind of trouble. The kind you walk into with your eyes open and your hands full of something you meant to put down before now. And by the time you realize you're inside it, the door has already swung shut behind you with a soft mechanical click. The Morrison cleaner got the oil out completely. She brought the jacket back to the studio on Monday in a dry cleaning bag and hung it on the hook outside Marcus's office door and did not mention it. He did not mention it either. But for the first time since she had started at Alara, when she walked past his office at the end of the day, the door was open. She noticed. She noticed the way you notice a shift in weather before you can name what changed. Something in the barometric pressure of the corridor, some small loosening. She did not walk in, she did not wave. She simply passed the open door the way you pass a window when the light inside is warm and you are on the cold side of the glass. And she carried that small thing home with her, careful as something breakable, all the way through the December dark. That at least was enough for now. The open door was not a coincidence and they both knew it. Marcus was not a man who did things by accident. Sarah had learned that in the first week, confirmed it in the second, and by December had accepted it as the organizing principle of everything he did. Every decision at Alara was intentional. The spearmint candies in the bowl, the Thursday linen restock, the coffees from the corner place with the oat milk ratio she had mentioned once to someone else in passing. If Marcus left his office door open on a Monday evening after 2 months of keeping it closed, He had decided to leave it open. She did not know what to do with that, so she did what she usually did with things she did not know what to do with, which was to let them sit and to see if they became clearer with time, the way you let something steep until you can taste what it actually is. December gave her 3 weeks to let it steep. During those 3 weeks, the open door became normal. Not always, not every day, but enough that she stopped registering it as an event and started registering it as a possibility. The way you register a window in a room you have started to feel comfortable in. Something that lets the air through when it needs to. She would pass the office in the late afternoon, and sometimes the door was open and Marcus would be at his desk, bent over paperwork or reading something on his screen, and sometimes she could see the back of his shoulders, and she understood from the particular quality of his stillness whether he had heard her footsteps in the corridor or not. He usually had. He did not look up, but he had heard. Not look. She learned to read this too, and she learned it the way you learn a second language. Not by having it explained, but by being inside it long enough that the meaning begins to arrive before the translation does. The first real conversation that broke his script happened on a Thursday evening, 10 days before Christmas, when the studio had its end-of-year gathering. Sarah had expected something clinical, a scheduled meeting perhaps, an acknowledgement of performance metrics, some form of organized and efficiently administered appreciation. She had not expected what Marcus had actually arranged, which was the studio common room rearranged with the chairs in a loose circle, a table against the wall with food he had brought himself in containers that turned out to be from the Ethiopian place 4 blocks east that everyone at the studio had mentioned at some point being fond of, and a small speaker playing something that was not the ambient studio playlist, but something warmer, jazzier, with a real tempo to it. He was standing by the table when Sarah arrived slightly early with a bottle of wine she had bought on the way, and which she now worried was the wrong thing to bring. He looked at the bottle. He looked at her. "You didn't have to," he said. "I wanted to contribute something," she said. He took the bottle from her with the same gravity he brought to every physical transaction and set it on the table with the other drinks, and then stood there for a moment as if calculating the arrangement. He moved the bottle 2 inches to the left. "That's better," he said, though she could not see what was different. "Do you always do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "Adjust things. Everything just slightly until it's exactly where you think it should be." He considered this. She watched him consider it, which was visible on him in a way that most of his interior processes were not. "Yes," he said finally. "Does that seem strange?" "No," she said. "It seems like someone who knows what they want." Something shifted in his expression, barely at the edge of perceptible. "And what's wrong with that?" he said. And there was a quality to the question she had not heard from him before, something that was less a challenge and more a genuine inquiry, as if he was asking her to tell him something he actually wanted to know. "Nothing," she said. "I didn't say there was. Most people think it means inflexibility. Most people confuse precision with rigidity," she said. "They're not the same thing." He looked at her for the longer look again, the one that had started happening more frequently, and this time she did not look away from it. She held it the way you hold a note until the room fills with it, and she watched him notice that she was not looking away, and she watched him decide something about that. "The food is getting cold," he said. "Then we should eat," she said. They moved to the table. The other therapists arrived in 1s and 2s. The common room filled with the particular warmth of people who have worked alongside each other through a long year and are grateful for the evidence of it. Marcus moved through the room in the way she had observed at the edges of other professional contexts, present but not performing, attentive but not performing attentiveness. He refilled people's plates before they had finished them. He remembered that Priya did not eat the lentils and redirected her to the other dishes without drawing attention to the redirection. He sat eventually in the chair closest to the speaker, which was the chair slightly set apart from the main circle, and Sarah, without particularly deciding to, took the chair next to it. They ate in a companionable quiet that was different from the quiet of the studio workday, less functional, more chosen. "You planned all of this," she said at one point in a low enough register that it was between them and not the room. "It seemed appropriate," he said. "It's more than appropriate." He looked at the food on the table, the careful arrangement of it, the thought behind each dish. "I don't know how to do things halfway," he said, and it came out slightly different than the other things he said, less precise, more plain, like something that had not been through the standard editorial process. "I know," she said. "I've noticed." He looked at her again. The jazz played. Across the room, Priya was telling a story about a client that made two of the others laugh. The December dark pressed at the windows. "What else have you noticed?" Marcus said, and his voice was still level, but there was something underneath the level that was not level. Something that moved. Sarah thought about the Wednesday before Thanksgiving and the 11-minute pause between texts. She thought about the cedar oil and the 2 seconds in the doorway. She thought about the name he had said without finishing the sentence. "A lot of things," she said. "Tell me one." She looked at him. "You hold the door for people and you do it like it's a reflex, but it isn't. You decide to do it every time. That's different." He said nothing for a moment, then, "Tell me another. You have the coffee order of everyone who works here memorized. You don't write it down, you just know. That's practical," he said. "Tell me something practical that is also kind," she said, "and I'll show you something that is both." The jazz shifted to something slower. Marcus sat with that for a long moment, the way he sat with things, processing them in the particular interior way that was his. "The pillow," he said finally. She waited. "In the restroom. It's down, not foam. I replaced it 2 years ago when one of the therapists mentioned her neck hurt after a split shift. She didn't know I'd heard. I don't think she ever knew I'd changed it." Sarah held that image in her mind. Marcus in a linen supply catalog or in the aisle of some home goods store, reading pillow fill information with the same careful attention he brought to everything, not telling anyone, just fixing it. "That's both," she said quietly. He looked down at the plate in his hands. "I'm not good at being known," he said, which was the most unguarded thing she had heard from him, and she understood from the slight tension across his jaw that he was aware of that, and had said it anyway. "I'm not asking you to be good at it," she said. "I'm just paying attention." The room around them was warm and full and completely separate from the specific quiet they had built between 2 chairs and a song at the end of a long year. Marcus set his plate on his knee and looked straight ahead for a moment, at the middle distance where a person looks when they are processing something that does not have a protocol. Then he looked at her. "I've been paying attention too," he said. She already knew, but hearing it was different from knowing it. Hearing it from him, with that particular plainness, with the particular cost she could see it had taken, was different in a way that settled into her chest like warmth and stayed there. "I know," she said. They did not say anything else about it that evening. But when the gathering ended and the therapists filed out into the December cold with their coats and their good nights, Marcus walked Sarah to the door the way he always did. And when she stepped out into the night air, he said her name once behind her, and she turned. He was holding her coat. She had left it on the chair. She had not noticed. She walked back and took it from him, and their hands were close in the exchange. Close, and then closer. And for one moment the cold December air came through the open door and wrapped around them both, and neither of them moved. Then she put the coat on. "Good night, Marcus," she said. "Good night," he said. She walked to her car and did not look back, because she had learned by now that she could not afford to. And she drove home through the city lights with her hands steady on the wheel and her mind turning over the exact sound of her name in his voice, and the warmth of the coat she had almost left behind. Christmas Eve arrived like a held breath. The studio was closed. The city was doing its particular version of stillness, that specific December quiet that was not actually quiet but was simply a different kind of loud, lower and slower. The hum of things paused rather than stopped. Sarah's apartment smelled of the pine candle she had lit in the morning and the coffee she had made too strong and not minded. She had no particular plans. She had made peace with that in November, and the peace had held. She was reading on the couch when her phone lit up. Marcus. She looked at it. She had not expected this. Marcus did not contact her outside of work matters, or he had not until the Thanksgiving text, which she had replayed more times than she would admit, and had filed carefully away in the part of herself she kept from public view. The message said, "Are you in the city?" Not a question mark. From anyone else that would have been a typo. From Marcus it was a statement made in the shape of a question because he did not want to assume, but he needed to know. She typed back, "Yes." The reply came in 4 minutes, which by Marcus's scale was fast. "I have a situation with the studio. The heat reset in room 3 has failed. I need someone who has done the manual override. You are the only one who has done it besides me." She read it twice. Then she read it a third time the way you read something when you are not actually reading it but are instead sitting with the fact of it. She typed, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She changed out of her pajamas, found her keys, and drove through the empty Christmas Eve streets to Alara. The studio was dark except for the reception desk light and the faint amber glow of the corridor lighting on its minimal overnight setting. Marcus was already there. He was standing in the corridor outside room 3 with his coat still on, which told her he had not been there long, and he was holding a flashlight even though the corridor was lit, which told her he had grabbed what was nearby rather than what was useful. He looked at her when she came through the door. Something crossed his face quickly at the sight of her, and she recognized it now. She had seen it in the storage room and in the doorway and across the circle of chairs at the gathering. It was relief, she understood. Not relief about the heat, relief at the specific fact of her. She did not say anything about that. She took the flashlight from him gently because he didn't need it and was holding it anyway. And she went to the thermostat panel on the wall of room 3 and did the manual override the same way she had done it in November, finding the secondary switch behind the panel housing and resetting the sequence. The heating system clicked and hummed and began to warm. She turned around. Marcus was in the doorway of room 3, leaning one shoulder against the frame in a way she had not seen him stand before. Less architecturally precise than usual, less maintained. He had his arms crossed and he was watching her with the full version of the look, the one he had been giving her in increments since October, now complete and undiluted and making no effort to be something other than what it was. The warm amber lighting of room 3 was at its best in the evening. Everything softened. The air smelling faintly of the eucalyptus and cedar oil that had been used in the last session, and lingered in the heated air of the space. The treatment table was dressed and clean. The room was quiet in the particular way of rooms that hold the residue of people being carefully tended. "The heat's back," Sarah said. "Yes," Marcus said. "It'll take about 10 minutes to reach temperature." "I know." She looked at him across the room. He had not moved from the doorway. She had not moved from the panel. The distance between them was exactly the length of a treatment room, which was not very far. "Marcus," she said. "I know," he said, and it was the same answer to a different question, and they both understood it. She walked toward him and he did not move from the doorway, because the doorway was where he had put himself and Marcus did not retreat from positions he had chosen deliberately. She stopped close enough that the distance between them was no longer a room but something much smaller. Something with edges she could have measured precisely if she had wanted to, and she did not want to. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The amber light held them in it. He raised one hand and touched her face with the side of 2 fingers barely, at the edge of her jaw. The most restrained version of a touch that was not restrained at all. That was in fact the full weight of 2 months of attention and precision and open doors and coffees left without comment, and a name said without a sentence to follow it. All of it concentrated in the width of 2 fingers against her jaw. She turned her face into his hand just slightly and heard him exhale. And then the rest of it followed the way water follows the shape it is given, quietly and completely. And the amber room held them, and the heat came back slowly through the floors. And outside, the Christmas Eve city was dark and still and entirely separate from the small, precise world of 2 people who had been paying attention to each other long enough that there was nothing left to pretend about. The door to room 3 remained open. Nobody needed it closed. January came in gray and direct, the way January does without the ceremony of December or the nostalgia of November, just the plain fact of a new year already in progress and a world that expected you to be in motion. Sarah was in motion. She drove to the studio on the 2nd of January in a new kind of quiet, not the quiet of uncertainty which she had been living in since October. A quieter quiet than that, something resolved. The specific stillness of someone who has put down something heavy and is noticing with a kind of wonder that their hands are empty and that empty is not what they had been afraid it would be. Marcus was at the reception desk when she arrived. He was not usually at the reception desk. He was usually in his office. He looked up when she came through the door. Something passed between them in the looking up and the coming through that was both ordinary and not ordinary at all. Both the professional morning greeting of 2 colleagues and the private recognition of 2 people who had stood in the amber light of room 3 on Christmas Eve and discovered the shape of each other. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. She hung her coat. She made her coffee. She sat at the preparation counter and reviewed her day's appointments. He went back to his office, but the door stayed open. Priya arrived at 8:30 and found them both in the studio going about the quiet, orderly morning of a new year at Alara, and she looked between them once with the particular perception of someone who has been watching people long enough to read what has changed in a room. And she said nothing, which was its own kind of knowing, and went to prepare her first treatment room. The spearmint candies were fresh in the bowl. The amber lights were warm. Outside, January moved through the city like a new chapter beginning, cold and clear and full of space. There is a kind of man who builds his walls so carefully that even he forgets there is something worth protecting on the other side. Marcus Ellison had been that kind of man. He had been it through the careful years of building Alara from a single rented room. He had been it through the early mornings and the late evenings and the Thursday linen restocks and the 12-page contracts and the oat milk coffees left on desks without ceremony. He had been it through the accumulation of small acts of care that he directed outward at everyone around him and never quite at himself. Because caring for yourself required being known, and being known required the particular vulnerability of allowing someone to see you clearly and trusting them not to look away. He had for a long time not trusted that. And then a woman with blonde hair and imperfect timing and a signed contract she had not read had come into his studio on a Tuesday morning and sat across from him with the casual confidence of someone who trusted the general goodness of the universe. And she had not looked away. She had looked more closely. She had paid attention with the specific patience and precision of someone who understood that the things worth knowing are rarely announced, that they are found in the small choices, the adjusted bottle, the down pillow, the coffee remembered, the name said without the sentence that should follow it. She had found him. Piece by piece, over months, through doorways and storage rooms and inventory rotations and gathering circles, and one quiet Christmas Eve she had found him. And he had let her. This was, for Marcus, the more remarkable of the two things. Not that she had looked, but that he had stayed still and allowed the looking, had not managed or redirected or documented it at a professional distance. He had stayed in the doorway of room 3 with his arms crossed and his coat still on and his face doing the thing he had spent years training it not to do, which was to show exactly what he was feeling. And he had let her see it. He was not good at being known. He was learning. She was patient with the learning in the way she was patient with everything she cared about, which was without making the patience visible, without performing it, simply offering it as a constant quiet fact of being near him, the way warmth is a fact of a room that has been properly heated. He had fixed the heating in room 3 in November alone, on a morning before anyone else arrived, standing on a step stool with a screwdriver and a manual he had ordered specifically because the system was old, and the documentation was no longer available digitally. He had not mentioned this to anyone. He had simply fixed it. It had failed on Christmas Eve. He had not been surprised. He had, if he was honest with himself, perhaps been waiting for it to fail, because it gave him a reason to call her. And calling her for a reason was something he could do when calling her without a reason was still, in early January, one step beyond where he was. He was getting there. Sarah knew about the step stool and the screwdriver. She had not known about them before Christmas Eve, but she had figured it out in the new year because she was paying attention, and because she had noticed that the manual on the shelf in the utility closet was newer than everything else on that shelf, and she had asked him about it, and he had told her. Briefly. In the way he told her everything, which was completely and without embellishment, and with the particular quality of someone who is still slightly surprised to find themselves telling you things. She had listened. She had not made him feel observed. She had simply received it. That, too, he was learning. The second week of January brought a cold snap, the kind that makes the city hunch its shoulders and walk faster, and the studio was warm against it, the heated floors doing exactly what they were designed for. The amber lights holding the particular frequency of light that a cold world makes you grateful for. Sarah had developed over the months since October a specific knowledge of what the studio felt like at different hours and seasons. The morning version and the evening version and the quiet holiday version and the full week version, all of them slightly different in the way that a face is different in different lights and yet unmistakably the same face. She thought of it as her place now, not in a possessive way. In the way that somewhere becomes yours when you have learned its particular quality of air, when you have memorized its minor irritations and its unexpected graces, when you know that the latch on the storage room door needs to be lifted while turning, and that the thermostat in room 3 has a secondary switch, and that the man in the office at the end of the corridor holds doors like a reflex, but it isn't. She belonged here. She had not expected that, when she had signed the contract on a Tuesday in October without reading it, had not expected that the 12 pages of professional obligation would turn out to also contain, in the small print of ordinary days, something she had not known she was looking for. Marcus had asked her once in the early weeks what she believed the purpose of therapeutic touch was. She had told him, making someone feel that they existed, that their body was worth caring for, that someone's hands were saying in 60 minutes what the world outside rarely bothered to say at all. He had written something in his notebook when she said that. She knew now what he had written. He had told her in January on a Tuesday evening when the studio was quiet and the rest of the staff had gone and the amber lights were on their evening setting and they were in the small kitchen making tea with the same comfortable ease of people who have found each other's rhythm, told her in the plain, direct way he had developed for things that were important. He had written, "She understands it. That was all. She understands it. She had held that in her hands like the coffee cup she always wrapped both hands around, feeling the warmth of it, feeling how simply and completely it said what it said, and she had looked at him across the kitchen counter with its labeled canisters and its clean surfaces, and she had said, "I think you understand it too. I think you always have." He had thought about that. He had looked down at the tea steeping in the cups. He had said, "I do better with action than language." "I know," she said, "your actions are very loud." He had looked up at her, and the corner of his mouth had done the thing she had first seen on a Tuesday in October across an oak desk, the thing that was not quite a smile but was the architecture of one. The place where a smile would go if he decided to let it all the way through. He was deciding. She waited. The tea steeped. Outside, January held the city in its cold, clear grip. And inside the studio on the corner of Northfield Avenue, in the warm amber kitchen of a place that had become a home in the way that some places do, when you find the right person to be ordinary inside them with. Marcus Ellison let the smile through, all the way. It was, Sarah thought, the best thing she had seen all year. And the year had barely started.